Hi, we are here. This is the hometown historian Jonathan Miller at the Pennsylvania historical marker for the Hanover Resolves. We're here in Dauphin County. It's right near Grantville. The earliest resolves for independence in the state, drawn June 4, 1774 by Colonel Timothy Green and 8 Hanover Township Patriots. They committed their cause to heaven and our rifles. The significance of these resolves, in essence grievances, it really wasn't Declaration of Independence at that time, but they were the grievances and stating their case that if the British Empire would choose to, take the cause to be, to go after them with force, that they would commit their cause to heaven and our rifles. It was saying we'll go to war with them for our freedom. The significance, historical significance of these resolves cannot be overstated. I mean, this was the first of its kind for independence in this state of Pennsylvania. So it's extraordinarily significant. I do talk about, when I'm over at the Hanover Churchyard, Old Hanover Churchyard, I talk about the resolves. I give like what the actual 5 resolves were, who the members of the committee were. These gentlemen, they put their lives and their livelihood and everything that they held dear. If this was found out, they would be potentially put to death and lose everything. So it took extraordinary courage and bravery to do this, and they were men of honor. And they, in a lot of ways, they probably inspired quite a few other communities following, shortly a month afterwards, to draw up their own resolves, which would eventually lead to our Declaration of Independence. So the Hanover Resolves, very, very important. And we will see you just here in a couple seconds over at the Hanover Churchyard, where we talk more in depth about the Hanover Resolves, about Colonel Timothy Green and Colonel John Rogers. Thanks, everybody. All right, so I am back. It is Colonel John Rogers. I figured this would probably be as good a place as any other. There's a Colonel William Allen here as well to talk about the Hanover Resolves, because the historical marker is right along 22, and quite honestly, it is an extraordinarily loud area. So I figured this would be a good place to actually talk about it. I have my handy tablet. I've taken that off of Cliff. That seems to be a good idea because I can't remember a lot of information, and with the Hanover Resolves it's actually quite a bit of information. We're going to go to that historical marker next, but I figured here at the cemetery, this being in North Hanover Township and being one of the major individuals behind that, Colonel John Rogers is apparently buried here. Now they had said that he was buried at Derry Churchyard, Presbyterian church there as well, and I vaguely remember that they have him listed as being buried there as well. So he's buried at one of these cemeteries. Which one it is, I really don't know. On a note on the marker itself, it's actually was the very first blue and gold marker that was put up in Pennsylvania, if the information is correct, because before that they had all been plaques. We had been at Tulpahawken UCC, which was originally a Reformed church, and they had the red rose plaque that was on the actual church, and that's how they used to do the Pennsylvania historical markers. But apparently the Hanover Resolves was the very first Pennsylvania blue and gold marker. Whether that's true or not, that's just the information I was given. Anyways, they talked about Colonel John Rogers is one of the signers of this Hanover Resolves. He's buried at Derry Churchyard. Apparently they have him listed on this one as well, so which one he's actually buried at, I really don't know. I'll have to look at Find a Grave, and then I can answer that for you one way or the other. Maybe there's 2 Colonel John Rogers, which is sort of weird because these really are not that far. These cemeteries are not that far apart, and it'd be 5 miles or so. But the Hanover Resolves were actually, these were a precursor to the Declaration of Independence. It's actually considered to be the earliest of these types of documents in Pennsylvania history, where it's sort of listing the issues that they had with the British government and with King George and how they had been treated and those types of things. It was a little bit easier, like the reason it happened here, like in Hanover Township, and not in places like you'd think it'd be in Philadelphia or someplace like that. It was actually a lot easier for the individuals in a rural community, or known as the wilderness at that stage, to be able to have these types of free speeches, because the British government had a lot of their troops in these areas, like the city areas like Philadelphia and New York City and Boston. So what you were allowed to say and talk about, especially when it came to talking down on the British government and the British Empire, was highly frowned upon, and it was pretty dangerous as well. These resolves were basically the beliefs that they, from their talks that they had, and they had different talks in different townships. They're called the Hanover Resolves because the first township that they had these talks in this area would have been Hanover Township. The Hanover meetings were believed to have been the earliest, set up by Chairman Colonel Timothy Green, who Timothy Green and John Rogers both were colonels. They were actually highly involved as well. At this time, we're in Dauphin County right now, right across the line from Lebanon County. Lebanon County and Dauphin County didn't exist at that time. Actually, Lancaster County and Berks County were much larger and went much further west, and actually ate up quite a bit of the territory that is Lebanon County. All of Lebanon County would be in there, but probably most of Dauphin County as well. So they were actually highly involved with forming sort of that regional, or the county, Lancaster counties, because you'd have like your local townships, they'd have these committees, and then you'd wind out having your counties, and then it would go up and up and up till you got to the state level, and then eventually U.S. Continental Congress. Other signers were a James Corinthers, Josiah Esby, Robert Dixon, a Thomas Copenhaver, a William Clark, a James Stewart, not Jimmy Stewart, a little before his time, and a Joseph Barnett. These were individuals that were definitely patriots, and they did, these guys, when they became parts of committees, especially when you were in essence talking treason, is what you're talking. So they were putting, especially the guys that signed the Declaration of Independence, you were forfeiting basically everything you owned, including your life and your family's well-being, because this was the largest empire in the world. You didn't mess around with them. So I'll talk about some of the exact resolves. The first one was that the recent action of Parliament of Great Britain is iniquitous and oppressive. Second, that it is the bounden duty of the people to oppose every measure which tests to deprive them of their judgment. Third, that in closer union of the colonies lies the safeguard of the liberties of the people. Fourth, that in the event of Great Britain's attempts to force unjust laws upon us by strength of arms, our cause we leave to heaven and our rifles. And then the fifth one, the final one, that a committee of 9 be appointed who shall act for us and on our behalf as emergencies require. Basically, it's sort of like, if you read like the Declaration of Independence, some of this, the Constitution, the way they spoke, the way they eloquently talked about our liberties and our freedoms, or just so they talk about that. I love, like in National Treasure, character of Benjamin Gates is like, nobody talks like that anymore, and they really don't. Like the eloquence, they understood what it was like to fight for freedom, and we complain about our freedoms, and I think, in some ways we have quite a few things that right now sort of are a little scary, that you really need to value what we have and how many people fought and died. And like being here at the old Hanover Presbyterian churchyard, how many of these individuals sacrificed so much so that we can be free. And freedom is not something that you take lightly. And it's just the eloquence in which they spoke. I just love it. It's like, we trust if it comes to basically to war, we trust our fate to heaven and our rifles. So they were willing to die. And this was the first document of its kind. They do have, it said this did predate, it's called the Mecklenburg Declaration. It does predate that, but unlike that, there isn't any controversy whether it's real. I guess with the Mecklenburg document, which I'm not really sure what that is, maybe it was done later or was made up, but they believe inspired the Hanover Resolves. Other townships began to form their own meetings with similar resolutions in Middletown, Hummelstown, and Lebanon. And they all did that probably basically within the month of this happening. And then in December 1774, Timothy Green and John Rogers helped form that thing, the council that I was talking about, the committee for Lancaster County, and were ready when the shot heard around the world news came up in Boston. And the rest, as they say, is history. The revolution followed, and these individuals decided to put everything on the line. So with that, I am going to end this video. We will see you next time. I'm going to be going over to the actual historical mark next, and that'll be before this actually, but just because of how loud it is, it's just easier to do the talking about this here. And I thought it's an appropriate setting because who knows, maybe some of the guys that signed the Hanover Resolves are buried here. I mean, if Colonel John Rogers is buried here, he was like the co-chair basically. He was the highest in the committee besides, Timothy Green. So these men, these women, they gave everything for our freedom, and the Hanover Resolves was the first of its kind. Little more than 2 years before the actual Declaration of Independence, but it just showed that for years prior to the Declaration of Independence, people were talking about, we need to get out of this. It's what's happening right now isn't right. We don't have our freedoms. We're not being treated equally or fairly by the British Empire. And, those seeds of revolution were beginning. And some of the earliest seeds began here in Hanover Township. So with that, I will say a fond farewell, and we will see you all about town.